All right, I guess we're continue with the second webinar on procurement. Welcome everyone. So today we're going to just tie up a few loose ends from Monday and go more into discussion about the transparency and somewhat overview on procurement policies. Again, it's the presentations at a really high-end level. So what we're hoping for is that people, go to the FNNBOA website and download the 9 booklets. And the 9 booklets, they range between 12. They range between 12 to 14 pages in length, and has more information, and then we reference more information. So it's, we're trying to move, as we just talked earlier, probably about 95 hours to, people get certificates in this, just to give a good overview on procurement and the processes, etc. So what I want to do is I'd be interested, and I know that when I talked to Rasika, she was mentioned she may or may not be on, but I'd be interested if anybody wants to share, how tenders are done or how they manage some tenders, or that whole, do they do pre-qualifications, or I'd be interested to hear from others on how they carry out their procurement. And it also gives us more of an understanding of what's actually happening out there. So anybody willing to make any comments? Elvis, you got any thoughts on how do the communities do tendering on building homes? Do they pre-qualify? Do they send out for 2 or 3 tenders?
We had a community meeting on that issue about a couple of years ago with who was from Ottawa, Keith.
Yeah.
He was up here, him or his brother, one of the editors, and apparently I wasn't there at all. But they had discussed a few matters on procurement, and from my consensus, like, we weren't even that far ahead. Like, Two Big First Nation wasn't that far ahead to adapt one to the process. So, so right now, like, I'm not sure what's going on about that here.
Okay. I noticed Lorraine, how does Meadow Lakes or some of the communities you deal with, do they do pre-qualification, or do they have several they can pick from?
Yeah, just speaking on the First Nation communities that I work with, obviously capital projects are run through project managers and they're tendered professionally. Housing projects, basically the standard to meet is whatever CMHC is asking for. Otherwise, I think there's no set process, put it that way.
Right. But a good comment that, yes, capital projects are tendered because of the funding stream and their requirements, which I've often wondered why, for housing, which is still a major asset, they don't require any processes per se, which I find interesting. So.
True. I agree.
Okay. Yeah. And again, it's been our experience that a lot of the communities actually run into high housing costs because of they don't tender, they get surprises, substantially more cost. I know about a half a dozen of various lawsuits between builders and First Nations, and And I know in a couple of them, they didn't have clear specifications on what they're responding to. So I know there's a huge gap, and it's something that maybe FNNBOA as an organization might want to endeavor, and that is doing spec writing on behalf of First Nation communities. Because if you're only one or two people, you're not going to have the capacity or even the expertise to write a spec to build 4 or 5 homes. So we know a lot of people are left on an island trying to figure this out. So hopefully, some of these processes that we talked about can help to address that. We talked about a little bit about the Canadian Construction Documents Committee. This is really a well worth a visit for everyone. They have various documents, contract forms between the owner and contractors. If you have a contract based on cost plus, or if you have a contract based on unit price, they have documentations for surety bonds, for the big bonds, performance bonds. There is a cost to download these documents. It's not that much. Claude, do you know how much it costs to be a member or to download these documents?
Offhand, I don't remember, John.
It's not a lot of money. It might be a few $100s, maybe at best, I think. So, but it's also good about using the CCDC materials is that not only does it build trust, but it really simplifies your bidding and contracting. Most contractors, if you show them a CCD contract, they'd be aware of that. So they shouldn't say, oh, I've never seen this before. So it allows them you got consistency in terms of language. It also, reduces your risks. So, the contracts, they've been vetted, they've basically been approved. So you're minimizing your risk, at least legally in terms of some of your contracts. But also, I think it will give the community confidence in the sense of, they're using documents that are they're transparent, they're balanced, they're standardized. The documents used recognize legal precedents. There's legal documentation, so it's safe to reach out and use their documentation. So it's a source that should be used if you can. The other point we want to raise from Monday is the national master specification. Again, this is getting into more technical understanding, but basically what it does, it's a framework for writing construction project specifications. It's really used more for capital, but you can also use it for writing specification for residential. And what it does, it provides, very detailed information by product on how you want something to be, implemented or designed. So it's something that we may give a webinar on, because people who are doing any spec writing should be familiar with the National Master Specification. So, for example, in part 1, it gives a specific administrative requirements about how to set up a tender, how to present the information, what actions you're requiring the contractor to take, for example, in terms of window installations. And again, that goes into our book 8 on our procurement documentation. So, for example, going into a little more detail. So part 1, it basically, defines statements, and that's what sort of focuses on: delivery, storage, and handling, like who's responsible for delivering the items, who's going to store the items, who's going to clean up after the items, You can provide special instructions, who's going to maintain it. So the MNS helps to set up that structure. There's also another important document, which is the master format. And I'll let Claude speak to that one because he's got more of the expertise on this one.
Yeah, thank you, John. The master format is basically we'll call it a North American Universal Construction database and category system that's used for just about anything you can think of in construction. So from the estimating point of view, from the material organization database point of view, also the specification point of view. So they're all kind of tied together into this master format. So for example, if we're talking something like concrete, as shown here, Division 3 about concrete, even Division 3 is broken down into the formwork, the reinforcement, and so on, the placement of the concrete, the type of concrete. So, you know, and then we think about concrete. Well, we're just thinking about concrete in general. How many other different types of concrete products can we think of, like precast? You know, so there's a number of different sort of subdivisions or subtopics to this. And it's simply a way of organizing. So what's happening in the industry, construction industry large, like I say, it ties into estimating, it ties into the spec writing. And certainly if you wanted to look up a product, Division 3 on concrete in a manufacturer's database, such as the Suites catalog, the Suites catalog lists a number of different, we'll say, corporations that want to really promote their materials. You know, why not use this material because it's really great or because it's the most economical? So again, it's a cataloging of basically anything you can think of in the construction sector. Over to you, John.
Yep. Before we go further, just comments on the, Lorraine want to mention something about the CCDC docs, the Canadian Construction docs. Go ahead, Lorraine.
Yeah, sure. I was just trying to pull out the information I had on that, and I can't find it because I kind of put it away for about a year now. But I did, on behalf of the First Nations that the Travel Council works with, look into that. And we actually paid for, and I don't remember the proper term, we paid for being able to access and change those documents to suit, because you can't just go in there on their public documents and change them. And then you can actually just rewrite right on their PDFs and change the forms and different documents to the master format and the tendering forms and the whole process. And then they give you a that you can use to show that you're legally using those documents.
Right. So you can tailor it. Yeah, you can tailor it specifically to the needs of the council.
Yeah. That actually went nowhere. I'll have to pull it out and dust it off again in view of this workshop.
And why did it go nowhere? Just that the use of any form of a contract or familiarity or the...
Yeah, I think what it is, it's just it's something new. It's something normal. It's an extra work, I guess, in view of what is. You know, everything's received well and everybody agrees to it, but then the First Nation that I try to use it with in particular, and it's not just them, everybody I work with does that. They have kind of an informal process just to get things going because they're kind of spread so thin. And so protocol kind of falls out the window and they just do it. So although we have all these nice little formats that we share, they're just not used and put into practice.
Until something happens and then it becomes a problem.
Yeah. So I guess it just takes some persistence just to. And so, like I said, I'll probably pull it out and dust it off again. I was trying to find my files, but they're not even close at hand anymore, so I'll have to pull them out again. Yeah. So and it doesn't cost a whole lot to get that certification that you can use those documents, but and we have it, so I should probably pull it out and start using them again.
Yeah, because it's been my understanding, it's again the informalities, and I know they want to streamline the bureaucracy and say, well, that's too bureaucratic for us. We know what we want, but I think what's happening is, more of the contractors are getting more skittish of not having any proper forms and processes. So, it's really protect everybody to make sure that they understand. Again, disposable of items that are left over. So who cleans up and gets rid of all the woods and the leftover construction materials? Like I even know when I was having work done, like who's paying for the dumpster and the dumpster fees, and that can run up to $1,000 right there. So yeah, so it's I know it's something we have to probably push and help to build and sort for better contracting. Okay, so today, or for that bit of time left, so we want to focus on transparency, influence, and the whole process of procurement. Basically, we're focusing on books 1 and 2 in the procurement documents. So, unlike regular purchasing by private buyers, public procurement or council procurement, it involves a number of stages intervening between the decision to buy and the actual purchase. And what happens, we have goods and services, that First Nations are buying. They sort of try to enter in a contract with a private person to provide particular goods. And once those goods are provided, they're subject to, theoretically legal terms and conditions as part of the contract. And what happens in the procurement processes, there's a number of stages of contracting. There's covering the initial assessments. There's budget allocations. There's marketing, as we talked about. There's preparing the tenders, evaluating the applications. So it's a major process that involves a number of players. And the ultimate goal of any procurement is to satisfy, public interest. In this case, to satisfy the interest of the community. That a good procurement process that obtains the goods and processes, you're going to get a better value versus a process that is not following processes or any format or any phrases. Generally results in a procurement that's not all that positive. So basically, it's really about the legality and the illegalities between political influence and procurement. And it's really, I think it's the new cool in the sense of First Nation communities. They want to save money. They want to make sure they're getting better value for their dollars. And while procurement is a strange, is a new term, it's just basically how do you get a better bang for the dollar is really what we're trying to look at, and making sure that process is relatively clear. And there is, a legal framework around procurement. So, for example, the criminal code, I think it's section 121. It makes it an offense for the public officer to receive a benefit of any kind for cooperation, assistance, or exercise of influence or an act of omissions in connection with any matter of business relating to government or council in any of those decisions. And basically, the interaction between the council and the contractor, well, the main purpose of procurement is to award a contract to a private sector or a private individual. The interaction between the First Nation and the private may lead to unethical legal practices such as bribery, receiving gifts, favoritism, special treatment, and preference given to friends or colleagues. And we know throughout, and this is not a First Nation issue. We had the Charbonneau Commission in Quebec that looked at this whole process. This is definitely not a First Nation process. It impacts many communities. It impacts the private as well. So the question becomes is, how do you safeguard against those processes? So even, the last bullet, consider the fact that accepting hospitality or other benefits that have a real perceived or even a potential influence to the person's objectivity or neutralize it is also an illegal activity. So basically, if a gift, a hospitality, or other benefits is offered with the expectations to influence, your duties to perform a decision, then it's considered a bribe, and it's not a gift. And it's clear on how that functions. And there's been politicians and people fired. It happens a lot. And I know, everything from somebody working in procurement. So the most recent one I know of was somebody orders foods and products for a hospital, and he received a set of pots and pans, and from a company, and on receiving that set of pots and pans, it was found out he received them and didn't declare it, and basically was fired. I know myself, when I was working for a regulatory agency, that I could not go for lunch with anybody that we regulated. This was in the alcohol industry. And if I went for lunch, I could not have my lunch paid for. And then then I had to do a briefing note on what was discussed at that lunch and who attended and what was the topics. And I got to the point where you never went out for lunch with anybody you regulated, and you always have meetings in the boardroom. So, and we know of, we can go on and on, all this, the challenges of, the interaction and gifting and not declaring. And what we hope to talk about here is how to address these issues so that upfront what you can and cannot do in terms of gifting. So the first one is a policy framework on procurement. There's a couple of documents in book 1 that we make reference to. There's the Canadian the construction contracting guidelines for First Nation and Aboriginal communities. I'm not sure if anybody knows that that document exists, but it's been out for quite a while. There's another one called Procurement for ISC or INAX funded infrastructure. They set out a whole series of procurement requirements, really more so for capital products and buildings. And the First Nation Financial Management Board, they put out a really, I think, a really nice procurement policy framework that addresses, many of the issues that we've been talking about, how to proceed and how to move forward in terms of developing your own policy guidelines. So in procurement policies, there's 3 key concepts. There's accountability, transparency, and value for money. So let's look at, what these terms are. So accountability, it's really the concept of, accountability. It applies to First Nation councils, institutions, the borrowers, the people involved in the contract. And it basically holds those involved, they're accountable for their actions or their inaction. So if somebody is involved in a tendering process and sees or identifies items that they feel uncomfortable with, and they don't take any action, or they just say, well, I can't comment, then even the inactions result in a lack of accountability. So that's what happens in these procurement policy processes. The people involved are under a lot of legal scrutiny, as well as professional scrutiny, to identify, to make sure that this whole accountable process is taking place. Under transparency, it requires the organizations, or in this case, First Nation councils, enables the appropriate review of procurement activities, supported by appropriate documentations and disclosures. So basically, when a community is developing their procurement policies, you want procurement information that's made public. You want to make sure that if you're tendering, it's clear on how decisions are being made. It's done in a timely manner. People have access to the information. There's appropriate reporting of the procurement activities. So if somebody's awarded the contract, it's clear who got the contract, and it's clear what they paid for in terms of the contract. You can use confidentiality provisions in contracts only where justified. So theoretically, any monies that are spent by the chief and council should be a public record, and how that decision was made, and how that decision was made to be awarded. Now, some questions are raised. Is that for absolutely everything from ordering pencils to, tendering, larger buildings? Well, what some communities, what we're suggesting, and what some private sectors do, that anything over a certain amount, so like a $5,000, has to be procured in terms of costing. So let's move away from housing. So let's look at other big ticket items. So purchasing of trucks, purchasing of insurance policies. Again, is there a transparency process in terms of tendering of insurance policies? So if you already have insurance from one company, how do they get that contract? And why aren't you tendering out that contract, let's say every 2 years or every 3 years? The other big one is value for money. And that is the principle of value for money means the effective, efficient, and economic use of resources, which requires an evaluation of relevant costs and benefits, an assessment of risks, and non-price attributes or life cycle costs as appropriate. So price alone may not necessarily represent the value for money. So, some people say this is the cheapest price, so therefore, they get the tender. Price alone is not the key factor. It's a question of, so for example, risk. If you get a lower contract price, well, how appropriate is that company in terms of reputation? Can they deliver? Do they have the appropriate machinery? Can they provide what they're saying? So, if you assess the risk as extremely high, and maybe that might outweigh the low cost. So we know procurement decisions influenced, by politics. And again, this is not an Indigenous. It happens, off. We had the discussions on the we issue federally in the last few months, and perceptions of, political influence. As a general rule, there should be no political involvement in contract award and decisions. And basically, the procurement process has no room for politicians. They shouldn't be involved directly or indirectly. And by mixing politics and procurement, generally doesn't end well for the communities. The communities will end up paying more. So, for example, if a community receives, gifting of, X, at the end of the day, it's not a free gift. You pay for it in terms of, the value of what's being provided. So nothing's for free. So how to prevent political influence? Establish procurement policies and procedures. I believe, based on our understanding, very few communities have procurement policies and procedures. And we are suggesting there's a number of templates that could be used to introduce that. Establish procurement and a code of conduct. And the code of conduct is also important because it focuses on the roles and responsibilities of everybody involved. Everybody from the housing people, the housing officer, to the politicians. And why it's important? Because you want to look after the community's interest. You want to make sure you're getting best value. You want to make sure that the process has integrity and is fair. Many times we hear about, oh, this contractor got the contract, and we say, well, how did he get it? Say, well, we don't know. He got it. We're not sure of the process. Or he's the uncles or the brothers or the chief's relatives, or so there's some relationship there. So that brings on a lot of self-doubt, and then the question becomes, are you getting the best value? In most cases where, procurement is being influenced, generally that person may not have the qualifications, and so therefore you may not get the best result at the end of the day. So as part of the procurement policies, establish conflict of interest guidelines, understand the role of procurement, try to maintain that ethical compass of the community as their moral compass. So basically you want to make sure you're looking after the responsibilities of the community. So under the conflict of interest, there's, three other bigger concepts without going into a lot of detail. Again, the book on conflict of interest makes reference to it. But basically, there's three broad functions. One is understanding the role of procurement, and that is the chiefs and council and the community members need to understand how procurement functions. They need to understand that it's a very orderly process to purchase goods and services, and how it's handled. The second is to support vendors' engagements and contracting procurement. So if you're getting involved with purchasing raw materials and packaging, it's largely, trying to provide support for that whole process, so people on the other side who you're purchasing from understand how the decision was made, and they understand their roles and responsibilities. So, for example, if we're going out for tender, the procurement policy should say that, we do not receive gifts from people who were tendering. We do not receive contributions. You could have a procurement policies where maybe somebody, a contractor may turn around and say, well, look at, I want to provide a playground, but that should not be part of the process, and that has to be done as an independent decision outside of the procurement. So if they want to provide that win or lose, that has to be handled by a whole different process, and it has to be clear that that process of somebody paying for swing sets or playground is independent of the decision that's being made. The third area of this whole of conflict of interest is value-based strategies. That is, making sure that the overall corporate the overall purchasing is done to support the community and better value for the community and the chief and council. So a procurement process helps to provide that open decision making. And again, clear report on who gets it and how they get it. So some examples of procurement policies. So there's an excellent example of policies and procedures can be found at the First Nations Financial Management Board. I think it's a really good, it's a good template. You can easily take it and adopt it. You can work with it. You can add the First Nations communities in it. The other one, which I think is an excellent, and it's really detailed, the First Nation Financial Management Board is based on the next one, which is the Government of Canada's Standards of Acquisition, Clauses and Conditions Manual. And it goes on from all these various chapters on how to purchase how to purchase products and how to respond, how to set up tenders. Just looking at a question here. Transportation may be hard to give out with some capital programs. Do you want to explain a little bit more, Elvis, on your comments?
That's fine. Like I'm talking about transparency. You want transparency coming from your capital departments, like your management for housing and the directors, and maybe some chief and council members. Some of them won't at all kind of elaborate to that. And discussion would be just discuss about something else. Change the subject.
Yeah, because they don't want to. Yeah, so procurement it's again, I use the word it's the elephant in the room. They don't want to talk about it, but it's really important to talk about it because you want to make sure that the processes are fair. And again, the earlier comments, there is a clear procurement strategy for capital items, but for the life of me, I cannot figure out that there's not a heavy suggestion on housing items, but also by people who are providing the funds in terms of procurement and how those are being rewarded. So it's a big issue, I think.
Yeah, it is. But some will tell you what they know, but they tell you what know. Sometimes they don't know that much, but they only know as little, I guess. And they'll tell you about that much about transparency.
Yeah.
And it's like you have to dig in. I mean, like you have to approach the different people that's running the program, and if you go to finance and everything, I'm sure definitely they won't give you those numbers.
Well, that's right, and I what I find very interesting. So the AFOA, which is the Aboriginal Financial Officer, whatever they call, I believe they haven't gone down this topic of procurement and processes and
well, it doesn't seem likely right now anyway. It's just like what's happening today is what's happening today, as we speak.
I hear you, and it's going to be a major shift on how to improve or actually implement procurement policies. Claude asked a question. It's been my experience showing favoritism can often lead to lack of support in seeking best price or obtain best value when requesting prices. Absolutely. Claude, want to go into more detail on some of your examples you came across?
Yeah. Hi, John. In my experience, when I was working for a general contractor, I was doing a lot of estimating and on-the-site supervision. And, unfortunately, there were a few times when I would be requesting price from different suppliers. to kind of put a bid together to go after work for a project. And lo and behold, what I found out is every once in a while, my boss, who was the owner of the company, would come in and say, "Hey, Claude, what's the latest prices?" Blah, 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 blah. Go in his office, the back room, and be on the phone with his buddy saying, "Hey, guess what price we just got? That's the lowest price." So he was basically selling out the people I was trying to get good pricing from for a project, which it gets into this ethical concern of, yeah, he's my boss. And it got to the point that when I would call this vendor again, you say, "Well, why would I bother calling you? Somebody's selling out my pricing." So it gets to the point of that sort of favoritism. And, after a while, I did find out that, hey, it was his drinking buddy or his soccer buddy or something like that that was getting the work. And it becomes pretty obvious, in the process of, I felt really bad because here's a person that's trying to put an honest bid forward and I guess being used and feel like they're being used and get to the point that, well, then why should I give you pricing on anything anymore? So that was sort of my experience.
I could relate to that, Claude.
Well, go ahead, Elvis.
I said I could relate to Claude.
Yeah. Well, I know in one really bizarre example, one of the, and I have many examples, but the one that was really bizarre was, so this tribal council decided to put a tender out to have the inside of I think a number of buildings to be painted. So they went out and put a tender out. And this person that's responsible for the tendering, so that was all great. And then when all the tenders were in, he came back and says, "Well, I can do for $10 cheaper." And so they gave it to him. So after all the bids came in, he used the bids to turn around and charge the council. And he hired him and his family to do the inside of the painting. And I know from the people that were involved, they were absolutely livid over that whole process, but they allowed it to happen, which mainly because, they're their bosses, they don't want to say anything, but it was, when I heard that, it was extremely, a bizarre situation. So what happens, and getting back to Claude's comments, so if people know it's they already know who's in the tender, they don't bid. And I know myself on consulting contracts, I'll get a call from a group and say, "Well, can you put a tender in?" And I say, "Well, why would I spend 5 days on a tender when in fact you're going to turn around and hire your buddies to show justification of the process?" I said, I'll submit a tender, and if I don't win it, I'll charge you for the time you write the tender. So if you want to use that process, I'll charge them for the time. So, which they don't pay, so you don't get involved. So, and I know, again, in a lot of my work, working as a private, I sort of hear, which I find funny, that I'll win a number of tenders that I'll put out. And I've heard from other consultants that I have an in with the existing government, or that I'm in because I know somebody, which I find really quite strange, because I am extremely non-political and have no ins, but I know how to write a really good tender, and I never ever look on a price point. I say, this is my tender and this is my cost, and I don't really, and that's how I go forward. So what I found strange when somebody mentioned, because I'll win quite a few tenders. So anyway, so that's so those are two key areas to do procurement. I know it's going to be really hard for a lot of communities to move towards some type of procurement. I know it's going to be a really major shift in terms of change management. but I also believe it's coming more and more an issue. When you talk, with the RCMP, they know what's happening out there, and it's just going to take, a few more, rattling the chains for this to take place. And again, it's not an Indigenous issue. It happens all over, but a lot of municipalities have procurement policies in place to safeguard against many of these issues. And if you have a procurement policy in place, at least you can, it's clear and it's clean in terms of people tendering. They know it's going to be, a fairly process that's going to be acceptable.
John,
Yeah.
John, wouldn't you have to hire more staff if you want to build a procurement strategy?
Good question. And adding to that question, who actually should be responsible for procurement? So to add to that, so there's two questions we get. That first question you raised, and the second one, who should be responsible for it? So to answer your first question, I would say you almost would have to hire somebody to do procurement all the time, and that would be, everything from not only, buildings, it will be, trucks and supplies and water. So once the council realizes that, anything over an X amount, let's say 5,000 will be tendered, that whole process keeps somebody extremely busy. But in terms of savings and value for money, that position would be paid for many times over. So the other question is, well, then, should housing managers be responsible? Well, I think everything's being thrown on a housing manager, and I just don't think it's really fair to them. But, I think what's happening by default, anything dealing with housing is falling on their shoulders for not only specification writing, but also procurement. So, I'm just not sure, I don't think it's fair to, housing managers, but it really should be the band administrator, make sure that these processes are in place if they're looking after value for money.
Would be wise to introduce to the public, like community, as a public, if this procurement strategy before, like that would be introductory for the procurement strategy, right?
Yeah.
People, the company will analyze it, but it has to be spoken to in simplest terms for most of the members, because technical words they don't understand, and that would take a little bit longer to explain to the public. You'll have some that will understand probably, but maybe about 20-25%, and the rest of the public don't understand what you're talking about. So it's going to take a little bit of a while to focus on that understanding.
Yeah.
You know?
And I agree. It's community understanding, but you can put it in very simplistic terms. And the simplistic terms would be, if you're shopping and you have 4 brands of Kleenex, facial tissues. So theoretically, people already do a procurement in their mind. So if you got 4 boxes at price A, B, C, and D, well. So they're going to know, are you going to take the price of A, which is single ply, or are you going to take, box C, which is double ply that has a lotion on? It's more money, but it's double ply, and you're not going to make your nose raw. So people actually do procurement, and I think that's the way, this has to be put forward. And again, I put this whole milieu, of, rental charges, procurement, right? It's all dealing with the efficiency and effectiveness of cash flow within the community. And I think there's a chance for huge savings. Like it's huge.
Yeah, I understand that.
And again, we don't want to convert, we don't have to preach the converted, but it's really trying to push procurement at the political level, which is really hard because, can you get that audience and
Yeah, just put it in layman. Yeah, just put it in layman's terms.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we've been attempting to do that as well. But again, we went really high level for these presentations, but at community levels, we even talked about, the price is right there. There's a whole procurement. The price is right. You're bringing 4 boxes of Kleenex, which is the better value. So it doesn't matter if you're purchasing 4 boxes, single box of Kleenex, or you're buying a house. It's the same. People go through that same thinking, that same logical deduction, right? So that's basically, unless there's any other questions or comments. Again, we really high level. The books we believe are a really good introduction. Click on the links, and if the links don't work, let me know, or let the info at FNNBOA. And we do have resources from the FNNBOA to help some communities to move forward on this. So if you're planning to talk about it further, we can give some community presentations on it. Now, we'll probably do that by Zoom because nobody's traveling, but we're available to talk more the basic elements of procurement to the communities.
John, what's your price for doing presentations?
Sorry, I missed the first part.
What's your price on doing presentations at different communities?
Well, we can go in, but we can also do it by Zoom. So if, for example, your community wants, say, presentation on procurement, we can bring it right down to into a 1-hour presentation on procurement. Very simple.
Okay. It's not 2 hours like this one, is it? I mean,
No, what we're doing within like 40 minutes, make it really simple. And I also know that the Housing Managers Association, we'll probably be doing a more detailed procurement, and actually looking at some case studies on how to, approve for contractors, how to look at tenders, how to write some tenders, some sample tenders. So
is that a different group?
Yes, it is. That will be the that's the Managers Association. I can send you that information, and that's supposed to be at a conference in June in Winnipeg. That's if it happens. Yeah.
Okay.
So
I would like that.
Yeah, and so it's something to either get involved yourself or somebody who is the housing manager from your communities. So if you're interested, we can see about bringing in some of our people as well. There'd be a cost for you, but that might be something to think about.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, good. All right. Thank you, everyone. So tomorrow we're continuing with inspecting existing dwellings. Later today, we'll send out the record, this presentation, and a few other documents on procurement. So anyway, thanks everyone, and enjoy your day.
Good job, guys.